Welcome. Yeah, we're gonna get started now. So, well, hi everyone. My name is Scott Schwartzwalder. I'm a project architect and associate at G7, also the chair of the AICP Committee on the Environment. But before we get started with today's event, I wanted to share some announcements for some upcoming events that we're hoping we can all come together for. We have an upcoming 3-part series on energy modeling. We have some flyers over there by the sign-in sheet. It's coming up in starting in September with an intro session in October with a overview session, and then a energy modeling workshop in November. It should be really interesting. And then we have a zero net energy homes event with Sam Rashkin that we're planning for December 2nd and 3rd with the Hawaii State Energy Office, as well as a building transformation forum led by USGBC. We're partnering with them in January of 2026. We're hoping we have a good turnout for that as well. And I think I'm going to hand it over to APA.
Yeah. Hello, hi everyone. April Surfernat. I'm with SSFN and also with APA. So thank you guys for being here and great opportunity to partner with AIA as well. So thank you, Scott, and your team. A few announcements for us. I'm a last minute spokesperson, so bear with me with my notes. Just to let anyone know who's here as a planner, and AICP, this is registered for AICP credit, so be sure and look for that, please, on your DM log. There is still time for HCPO. There's still tickets available. That's the Hawaii Conference for Planning Officials, which is being held here in Honolulu. So if you don't have your tickets yet to attend, please register for that. That is August 27th through the 29th. And then lastly, just know that APA elections are still open nationally and locally. So that will be open until September 5th. So go online and vote. And if you have any other questions about APA, I'm really happy to. I'll be here for the duration of this session. So thank you, Ben. Thank you for putting this great session together as well.
Okay, so thank you everyone for joining us today. It's our second event of a speaker series called Building a Greener Hawaii, Climate Action at the State and County Level, hosted by the AIA Committee on the Environment. And it's a very timely opportunity to have this conversation about resiliency, especially given the recent tsunami that was thankfully uneventful. But we're also very thankful to have a partnership with APA today, and we really value the cross collaboration between architects and planners and learning about these important issues in our community together. So a bit about our speaker series. It came out of last year's elections and this year's series of executive orders and budget cuts that have gutted and threatened programs in support of things like clean energy, conservation, and environmental justice, and pulled the U.S. out of several international climate goals. And we're only barely through halfway 2025. Instead of focusing on these pernicious efforts from the federal level, we're excited to spotlight the important work being done by the state and county leaders to make Hawaii a more sustainable, resilient, and healthy place. These are the folks who are setting ambitious goals like 100% clean energy, carbon neutrality, and protecting our city's infrastructure from the influence of climate change, and doing their best to achieve those goals while facing budget cuts from the federal. And with less support from the federal government these days, we ask ourselves how we as architects, designers, planners, and community members in the private sector can help step up and support those efforts. And with that, I'm really excited to introduce our second speaker in the series, Ben Sullivan, the Chief Resilience Officer and Executive Director of the City and County of Honolulu's Office of Climate Change, Sustainability, and Resiliency. Under Ben's leadership, the CCSR has been very busy developing and implementing numerous plans to address environmental impacts in our community. I'm looking forward to learning more about his office's work today and how we as architects and a design community can support their efforts to achieve those ambitious goals. And following Ben's presentation, he'll be joined at the front by Melissa May, principal and resilience lead at Haley Aldrich for Q&A and taking questions from the audience. So please welcome me in welcoming Ben Sullivan.
Thank you, Scott. This is a very kind introduction. I appreciate it. And who was the first presenter in the series? I don't know.
From Ku'u'ulani, Urban and Community Forest.
Oh yeah, that was like 4 months ago. I was here. All right, wonderful. That's a tough act to follow. We'll see if I can do it. Okay. So thanks all for inviting me tonight. And can we get a show of hands for architects and then planners and then engineers? Okay, architects first. Let's see. Okay, about half. Okay, planners, half, and then engineers. Okay, just a few brave engineers to show up. Architects. He thinks it's special kinds. Very much one thing. Students to page. Oh, look at that. All right. Okay, there's our agenda. I'm gonna get who's can you guys all hear me if I forget to put the mic up to my mouth? Can you hear me now? Do I need the mic? Oh, for those online. Yeah, okay. Thanks for the reminder. So you can see our agenda here. Can I also do a little more show? I'm just keeping you guys busy. We're gonna be aerobic here, okay? But I would like to know who's familiar with our office. Okay, and of those people, keep your hands up. Of those people who can actually say the full name of our office. Okay, I see 2 half hands. Melissa, go ahead.
Climate change, sustainability, and resiliency.
The mayor's office. Thank you. So we're gonna give a little background on the mayor's office, climate change, sustainability, and resiliency. We're gonna just touch on Climate Ready Oahu and what it is and how it fits in, and then talk about these other things. And the hope is that it's gonna stimulate a discussion this is a bunch of stuff we do. Our office has 2 big responsibilities. It's reduce carbon emissions and help people have a better, more affordable life while doing that. And it's also prepare for impacts of climate change. And the mission is really broad. We try to catalyze projects across the city. We try to catalyze projects inside the city. We're change makers. So the way I see this being effective is for you guys to ask me questions if you see something. If I'm not going deep enough, engage me or else I'm failing. So please do that as we go. And if you engage too much, we'll just stop talking to you. Okay, I know we weren't going to talk about the national scene, but it deserves just a moment at the beginning, right? We are in this crazy time where on the one hand, the World Court is saying, hey, get it together. Everybody has a responsibility to curb emissions. We all know we're at like 430 ppm. We all know that the situation is very urgent and that there's many things we have to do. We have to reduce our emissions on a personal level, on a state level, on a national level, in order to have a livable planet. And we also know that the federal government doesn't understand that in any way at this point in time. So that's a really, really big obstacle. I'm not going to talk more about that because this stuff is already happening. You've seen it. This is not in the future. This is now. So we all know that we're being impacted by climate. And I think we all know that we're on an upward curve for those impacts, right? Those impacts are coming faster and faster. We're already seeing the acceleration of impacts in our own environments. And so both those things, reducing our emissions, whether it's taking a scooter or riding a bike or whatever we can do and then also advocating and preparing is what the job is. And I would like to say it's for all of us. Like, I'm sure you guys are in the room because you agree with that. It's for all of us and not just for those that work in a climate office. So just to give you a little background on our office, we were created by charter in 2016. There's an ordinance that really describes a lot of the work we do. These are the program areas that we have focus in. So again, it's a really broad mission. When I say program, it's a couple of people in most cases. Some cases it's just one person, but there are areas where the city wants to do better that we're trying to catalyze change. So coastal and water is actually the adaptation program. That one and energy are probably the biggest in the office, but they all have really important roles and are doing really, really great work. So I should have a slide that shows the faces of the program managers. So I'll add that to the deck for next time because they're all great people doing really great work. These are our guiding documents. Does everybody know, you guys remember Matt Gonzer before me? He was yeah, okay, Matt did a great job. Matt was really instrumental in the purple Climate Ready Oahu, as well as climate action plan. And then, of course, Josh Stanbro, who was the initial executive director for the office, was the one who helped the team put together the resilience strategy. We still refer to these all the time. They're really helpful documents in terms of guiding our work. I put this in here as a start of the conversation because this is one of the things our office does, and there's a little bit of a fuzzy line, right? The city has a Department of Emergency Management who is responsible for the formal process of disaster response and recovery. So they're the ones who like figure out who's going to call who when everything just falls apart in a big disaster. They are the ones who are basically the brains of the operation, trying to direct traffic and tell everybody what's going to happen in what type of event in what kind of sequence. And they do a lot of behind the scenes work. However, beyond that kind of more structured and formal process, we also know that impacts are getting worse and communities are asking, hey, how can we be involved? How can we help? And one of the ways that we're seeing that is through resilience hubs. And so we support a network out of Kapi'olani Community College that is intended to really get these people together to kind of compare notes and look at what they can do in their own neighborhoods to create resilience hubs. And I'm sure everyone in this room, you guys are all familiar with the concept. Yes, it's pretty well treaded ground at this point. Yep, okay. Another, I put this in here because I thought it was fun, but also because it's important. It is pretty warm right now. I'm feeling like I'm sweating already. But it's, it's only early August or mid-August. It's going to keep getting hotter and hotter and through October, and it'll be cooking by the time we get to mid-October. We no longer have the beautiful, wonderful climate we had, right? It's gone. And a lot of people talk about like, hey, we should still design for trade winds and all these kind of things. And absolutely, yes, we should. But if we're designing for 50 years, we have to look at the fact that we know our temperatures are going to go up by 2050 by 3 degrees and by 2100 by considerably more. So like we continue to see it. As a matter of fact, I think what was the big jump? 2015 to 2019 was the first year we saw a huge jump in the number of 90-degree days, just like the count of days that went over 90 degrees. But here, I'm going to go back to that one. This is some of the messaging our office does around helping people understand the impacts of climate and the fact that we have more high heat days we're dealing with. This right here is a similar outreach effort that is associated with flood impacts. So we have done a lot of work, and we currently are the office that spearheads the community rating system, which if you're really wonky and you work through FEMA a lot, you'll be familiar with the community rating system. Basically what it is it's the city is taking on the responsibility of working on reducing flood risk and raising awareness around flood risk. And as a result, people that are part of the, I'm going to forget, there's too many acronyms right now, but the National Flood Insurance Program, NFIP, get a discount as a result of the work that we do, which is basically getting the message out, helping people understand that there's ways you can mitigate flood risk, both physically and also through insurance products and things like that make a big difference. And our work and our marketing for that actually brings the community a community-wide discount. So Climate Ready Oahu. Okay, again, this is tough because I don't know where everyone is. Who's familiar with it? A lot of you are familiar with the office. So of those who are familiar with the office, who's familiar with our resilience strategy? Okay, good number of people. We got like 5 or 6. You guys want to give me a shout out about like what you think about it, or any thoughts of like what's in there that you think is relevant to you? See, I'm pushing this back at you guys. You gotta engage a little bit. We just sit here and be quiet.
I'm gonna ask about the prior slide.
I'm gonna ask about the prior slide.
Yeah,
Should I go backwards?
sure, why not? So you said there's a way that communities get discounts on flood insurance. How does that?
So this is a FEMA program. So for flood insurance, the NFIP, National Flood Insurance Program, is subsidized by the federal government, right? So this is subsidized federal flood insurance. There's flood insurance rate maps for the island, and they determine who's at risk and who needs to have insurance. And then we as a city basically adopt a flood ordinance that says, here's what you have to do if you're in these areas. It has a lot to do with getting elevation certificates for all your projects and making sure that people are building above a certain height. That's one of the key measures. But what the community rating system does, which is what I was referring to, that's how the discount is received, is it basically is a check for the federal government to make sure that we're doing our job. So it's making sure that the city is really enforcing the flood ordinance. It's making sure that we're getting those elevation certificates. We're making sure that all those checks are in place. It's not just an ordinance, but it's actually being implemented. And so as a result, they now have greater confidence that we're actually doing what we're supposed to do to reduce flood risk, and so they can bring the cost of that insurance down across the board.
Okay, but it would be for new builds or.
It's for everybody within the zone, so it wouldn't just be for new builds. It's for anyone that gets flood insurance within the flood zones.
Even though you're not above the certain.
If you're not above, I don't think you can get it. I think you actually have to be above. Yeah. Okay, back to this. We were being quiet. I was waiting for somebody to offer up something from Climate Radio Wahoo. It's a purple book. It's like, that thick. There's 3 sections. Can anyone tell me what the 3 sections are? It's got right there in front of you.
Infrastructure.
I'm wondering,
Infrastructure is one. George?
I was just wondering if the, the federal government are going to allow a lot of changes, right? And there's FEMA and Army Corps of Engineers who is supposed to be overseeing some of the thing. They're staff short. So do you have the guidance of the federal government? I don't think so.
George, that's a great question. We run into this quite frequently, and we have different program contacts for different pieces within our office that interface with the federal government. And we've seen a lot of somebody's gone, they're not answering emails, and then they come back 3 months later and they say, oh, I'm still working. I was just on some embargo or something like that. So there's a lot of things in flux for sure. We have also had some funding pulled. We were anticipating a really large BRIC grant, which is building resilience. What is, somebody help me out? What's the BRIC?
Building resilience infrastructure in
Communities.
communities.
Yes. Yes. Okay. So that program was completely wiped off the map by FEMA, which was a huge national program. So we were working on some things for that. So yeah, it's definitely an environment where the federal government is throwing loops at people. I think everybody knows what happened. I think I actually was in the front of this room talking excitedly about the Inflation Reduction Act and all the wonderful things inside it, including the tax credits and everything, which have since, they're on the way out. So you can still get a solar tax credit, but you get actively soon. Same thing with electric vehicle tax credits, all that. Did I answer your question, George?
So sort of, but I just kept wondering about that the Texas floods right now. Where they headed, because and the federal government again seems to be not doing the job it's supposed to.
I'm going to reach and suggest that maybe the theme of this whole series is local and state self-reliance. Is that correct? Yes. Okay. So that's on point. Okay. So the Climate Radio Wahoo is really about people, places, and infrastructure. So if you read through it, it focuses on actions that the city needs to take at a really strategic level, high level. It doesn't sit there and say, in this street, we're going to do X or that Y. It really talks about broad strategies that we're going to implement to be more resilient. And so for example, we'll have a climate champions program, which is to say the city will engage with nonprofits and support them in taking on climate adaptation activities. Or we will work with Native Hawaiian communities and try to resolve some of the really challenging issues around EV being uncovered as sea level rise comes further and further onshore. There's many things that we all have to collectively try to resolve as a result of climate change, and the document does a great job of laying some of those out. just jumping around a little, okay. What can I do to get you guys into this? Any ideas, Melissa? Question?
Sorry, on your previous slide, how do you sort of you're obviously trying to generate these 3 sections, but how do you help enforce it? Or
How do we help enforce it?
or build those relationships so that other people are really empowered when it comes to it? Because I think a lot of people have the right approach, but then when it comes to it, money gets in the way. How do you give them a bit of extra power or support so that you can really give weight to the environmental impacts so that they can?
I love the question because that's exactly where we're headed with the next few slides. And it's super challenging. So it's the right question to be asking. So this is really just an introduction to the One Water concept. I'm going to assume you guys are familiar with One Water, which is a broadly utilized concept nationally that talks about unifying our kind of utility strategies around water and water usage so that we're kind of managing a system instead of managing, the water supply versus the wastewater versus the stormwater versus the natural environment. So this is something that the city and county has leaned into. And here's, right now it's somewhat of an internal process, but I will say that the internal process has really brought these agencies together to really think hard about how we are going to work together. So it's like that starting question that you asked, how are we going to enforce this? It's really to rely on each other and to understand each other's constraints better. I think one of the things that climate adaptation requires is for us to get out of our silos. And this is kind of boring. And like the silo conversation has been going on for a long time. That's what I meant for. It's exciting work. But what I mean to say is whether we like it or not, we're going to collaborate more because it's the only way we can succeed. So these projects, these agencies are in the room together all the time now, trying to figure out like how are we going to do this. Just to give you one example, several of these entities like environmental services and then water supply, they have their own revenue source, right? So they have their own capital projects and they're all moving along at their own pace. But when we go and do an adaptation project, if we're looking at raising a road or if we're looking at changing the configuration of something that's substantial, it involves all the utilities. That's not normally how things used to happen. It used to be one utility comes along, does their business, goes away. Now we have to all get together and figure it out. So not only do we have to do all the planning and environmental work together, but we also have to time all the budgets together. We have to really have a very, 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 very substantial commitment to making these projects happen. And we're in the midst of figuring that out. We're not like, I'm not standing in front of you saying, got it covered, we're figuring it out. We're working on the details now.
And
Please.
are you working with other cities? Like I know LA with the big One Water effort. Are you working with other municipalities to work within? It's the same thing, like, sewer comes by, digs up the street, then puts it all back. 2 months later, another utility comes through, digs up the street, trying to get multi-agency.
Yeah, you may have to repeat the question.
I can repeat the question for Alan, yeah. So the question Jill asked is, are we working with other utilities, or I'm sorry, other cities with regards to this One Water concept and how they're doing it? And the answer broadly is yes. And I will say that, for example, some of our team was in Pittsburgh a week or two ago for the National One Water Conference. I didn't go myself, so I can't speak to it too much, but definitely lessons learned from other cities is a key thing. We actually put peer exchanges in some of our contracts now, just to make sure that we're actually talking to counterparts, whether it's a counterpart for me as the resilience officer, or like in one contract, we have a counterpart for the budget and fiscal person, because we know that individual is not going to talk to somebody like me. They need to talk to somebody who knows dollars and numbers. So making sure we're making those connections across cities is really important, because everybody is like in the head scratching, figuring it out, stumbling mode of how do we do this? And the more honesty and openness we can have about that, the more we can learn from each other. An example of that I'll give you is, the road raising question. So I'm not going to lay a bunch of maps of Waikiki out and say, here's what we got to do. But I will tell you this simply. We know that we're talking about 4 feet of sea level rise, ballpark, end of century. That's only 75 years away, right? We're talking about by 2050, we're talking about a foot of sea level rise and a lot of inundation that we have to deal with. So the question of road raising is a very real question. And there's only a few places that have explored it. Miami Beach is one of them, a very affluent community. They've done some road raising. Can anyone guess what the number one barrier to road raising has been in Miami Beach? You'll say aha as soon as you hear, but
People.
Close. Any other guesses? People, it was a guess, people, infrastructure, money, parking. Right, right? Where am I gonna put my car? That, because we are so ingrained to thinking, I will have a car, it will be parked, someone will pay for that space for me. But now you're raising the infrastructure and the same expectation exists. Parking is what has held back a lot of their, because what they did is they proposed, we'll raise the roads, but we're not gonna raise your parking. And people said, what? And they've stalled on major projects as a result of the parking issue. So I guess what I'm trying to get at, Jill, is get a smile on your face, make sure you're having fun, but also that parking, also that we are talking to cities, other cities, and we're learning from them. Oh, I did it again, I broke it.
Screen. It's a good person. Click somebody in. No, there you go. There you go.
So this is a little more on one water. This is really talking about the fact that, you know, the impacts of climate are forcing us to be more efficient and to collaborate and do all those things. Like, we're seeing these impacts now and we have to begin to respond. I think most folks know that the work that's going on in Sand Island and the planning that's going on for the retrofits in Sand Island, they're assuming like raising the treatment plant to 16 feet. So it's a fully, it's part of the planning for sure, but let's imagine the implications of just that, right? You got the treatment plant up 16 feet. Now, what about all the pump stations? What about all the roads? What about all the interconnections? There's a lot to figure out. And obviously, do nothing is not an option. The next thing I wanted to talk about is the Climate Resiliency Fund. And this is something I'd love for you all to be aware of. This is at council as we speak. We have been to the budget committee, and then we've been to the full council, and we are continuing to have discussions with them about how we might move forward with some of the funding. This is 1/2 of 1% of real property tax intended to stimulate action around adaptation and mitigation very broadly. Council put some specifics on it, but we're trying to get the first year's projects out to share what some of those are. Is everyone familiar with the Climate Resiliency Fund? No? Okay, so this is your tax dollars, and it's basically a charter amendment that was approved by voters that says the city shall spend 1/2 of 1% of our real property tax revenue on this type of work. And I will say that it's a really big opportunity to catalyze the work we're doing in the climate office, but across the city broadly. It is just catalytic, right? It's not going to solve. It's $9 million a year, so it's a good amount of money, but it's not like infrastructure money for folks that know the scale of the kind of projects we're working on. So one of the things that we have to do is we have to get better data. So this is a really foundational piece that we're asking. It's actually the biggest ask we're making of the Climate Resiliency Fund this year, but it's to go through the island and really measure out all the drainage systems, all the culverts, all the things that really need to be taken care of and be inventoried and understood so that we can begin prioritizing our capital expenditures for the drainage system, for the stormwater system. This project is super important. I don't want to use the word boring again, but I think it's like out of sight for a lot of folks. They don't really think about this stuff. But the reality is, with more rainfall, with more flood risk, we need to have this system in top shape, and we need to really get ahead of the curve on it. This is a fun project. This is a project that is being put forward by Bloomberg Philanthropies, and we've already been identified as a finalist for this. And the concept here is to actually do some food growing as well as some food distribution along the TOD corridor. And so we're asking council for funding to supplement what we expect to be awarded by Bloomberg in January, which is $1 million from Bloomberg. This $500,000 we're asking for would allow us to basically stretch the funding so that we can do the whole rail line instead of just doing the Ivy Lake Kapalama area, which is what the Bloomberg funding would do. And then all these little citations you're seeing here are where our plans kind of integrate to these projects, but that's just the reference, folks. Good old-fashioned energy audits. So all the city housing projects that you may or may not be familiar with, the Department of DLHM, Department of DHL, Department of Housing and Land Management, is a new department that was just aggregated from the Department of Land Management and the Office of Housing. And they have a mandate to really develop a lot of the new housing that is a high priority for mayor. But they're also going to be bringing all the city's affordable housing under one roof. And so our intent is to run energy audits on all these facilities and then hopefully improve their efficiency over time as well. This is the Climate Champions program. So you asked the question about how do we get people to help, or can you repeat the question maybe?
I think it was more like, how do you really empower people? Because I think there's a lot of like grassroots organizations as well as organizations that are put together, right, or have a vested interest. But then when it comes to it, when you're really in the room, how much power do you really have? You know, you're trying your best to advocate as a community or on whatever level, but then how do you have anything behind you to sort of enforce that or empower that action to happen, you know, other than building relationships and
Right.
Is there anything concrete people can sort of pull on to
Right.
kind of elevate the issue?
So this program is something we're excited about. It's called the Climate Champions Program. And basically how this started was the team said, hey, we need to empower nonprofit organizations in our community who are already doing climate adaptation aligned work to basically work with us and to give them more recognition, give them more support, allow them to accelerate their work, pay them to do some of their work. And so ultimately what this program was set up to do is we had received a grant for $1 million from the EPA. The grant was going to enable us to run with these 6 organizations for 3 years. And each summer they would have like a summer intern to support their staff. And then the rest of the time they would have a cohort of folks meeting, and we would be meeting with them as well and giving them resources so they could execute their projects. So whether it was help with data analysis or help with like, you know, how are you solving kind of permitting issues or whatever the kind of barriers they were facing on their various projects. Some were educational projects, some were kind of community-based projects. Wildfire Management Organization obviously works with communities to get fire certified, things like that. The Trees for Honolulu's Future came up with like this really cool card game that was about adapting native plants to climate change. So it was pretty great. So they all did really interesting work. Of course, the bad news is federal government came along and said, nope, we're going to take that money back. So after a year, they took it. We're asking council to fund it again so we can continue forward. This is a small program that relatively to the other apps is a small amount of money, but the Department of Parks and Recreation has a summer fun program, which is pretty amazing. It's actually 10,000 youth every year go to the department's community centers all around the island. And they do all kinds of summer activities, including I think they like do plays and skits and all kinds of stuff. But this funding was actually intended to incorporate climate resilience into that daily routine. You know, we want to enroll and enlist kids in the challenges that we have and help them understand to the extent that they don't already that this is critical work and understand what the city is doing and how they can be part of it. Okay, maybe this one's a little more relevant to you guys. So one of the things that we're doing is we are taking on, for all city capital projects, we have just recently created the climate change, what we call the climate change design guidelines. And this is basically guidance for all the city's capital investments in order to accommodate the climate hazards identified through climate change. And so basically how this works is this guidance is something that any agency proposing a climate project has to utilize if it's a city project. And they start by assessing the risk associated with the climate hazard. So they use what we call the climate exposure screening tool here, this one right here, the pointer here, no, this guy. And it's a pretty simple Excel-based tool that basically just tells the design team or the proposer of the project, here's the area that you're in and the exposure that you have to XYZ risk. So if you're near the coast, here's the sea level rise risk. If you're in a riverine environment, here's the flood risk. If you're in an environment that we expect there to be a lot of heat, there's the heat risk, all those kind of things. And then from there you go into the guidance, which is guidelines basically are the voluminous portion of this document that just like you would think, like it's any kind of design guidance. It basically helps you to solve. Here's 20 different ways to solve this particular problem. So these are things you guys are very used to as architects looking at design guidance. And then the last one is really like the cheat sheet for the design guidance. So just like the checklist tool to make it fast. We're very excited about this. This is a long time coming and very necessary. So you've got all these people that have been working in the city for 25 years, doing things the way they've always been doing it. And we're imposing this very substantial change on the system. And so we're asking for some funding to basically make sure that projects don't slow down along the way due to scope creep as a result of having to implement these things.
Is there any thought to then extending this onto private projects? Or does this stay only as a requirement for city projects?
So we have not had a discussion yet as to what the implications are for private projects. I think you can take what you will from the fact that we're doing this. And obviously we have a regulatory responsibility to the broader environment. I think there's probably some really smart things in here, but at this point in time, there's two things I'll say. One is that it's not even regulatory internal to the city yet, it's guidance. And so our thinking is to a project team, hey, this is, you now have the information about what the impacts are going to be, and you now have a set of solutions, and our expectation is you're going to address them, right? But it's still up to the professional responsibility of the individuals who are making those choices to decide how to address them, to what extent to address them. And that's really important for where we are right now. So I think there's actually some pieces I do want to talk about that at some point are going to have to be regulatory, that are going to be really difficult issues that we're going to all want to really engage in. And they're big, periodic problems that we have to just like jump into together. So a little more on the guidelines. So this is more just kind of a high level. I was already talking about this, but primarily about resilience. There is also a greenhouse gas reduction component in there that's important. It's like the easy things we can do to be more efficient, the easy things we can do if we have opportunities for solar, or even looking at building materials and other things like that to try to drive down the carbon footprint of the projects. We talked about the components already, so I won't spend a lot of time here. This, again, quick Excel tool, big fat volume this thick with lots of guidance and options for designers. And then just like the cheat sheet at the end, so you don't have to read the big fat thick guidance. And then I think this is something you all have a really good understanding of, right? So the idea for this tool for us is to avoid all the costly changes. And so this is really just simply saying, if we know what the constraints are at the beginning of the project, we're going to be in a much better position to implement and to realize savings and to create more resilient buildings at lower costs. Now, this is the thing I thought that would be interesting just to kind of tease at because it's necessary at some point. So right now, this information for design flood elevations is provided in the climate change design guidelines for city projects. And really what this is this just laying out all the variables that are adjustments to a design flood elevation that we need to consider for future scenarios. And I think where this gets interesting and where it really involves the architecture community is asking ourselves, like, what is it that we want to establish as a baseline for future areas, you know, whether it's Waikiki or town or anywhere. How do we go about establishing a uniform baseline so that when new projects are built, people understand and agree on the future scenario that we're building for so that we can be at the same elevation, basically. And then as people retrofit other buildings, do the same thing, right? I mean, I think right now, you see these new developments in Kaka'ako as an example, and you see like someone will decide we're gonna build up the base of the building 3 feet. Someone else is a little higher, someone else is a little lower. And it's a little bit all over the place because everyone's kind of taking their own best guess at what might need to be the elevation, but obviously we're in a much better place if we come together and agree. It's a challenging thing though to set up, and you can see just by these examples how serious the various degrees of flooding that we face, especially if you throw in the storm surge, which obviously Oahu has not seen a major hurricane in a very long time. So that experience in kind of modern history for us, so I definitely saw what happened during Aniki, but it's sooner or later we're gonna have that, whether it's 6 feet or 12, we're gonna have that experience. And then this is really just kind of, again, repeating the idea that at this point in time, these are not mandatory benchmarks, even within the city. And so to that question of, is this leading to the greater public? The answer today is no. But is there something we can learn? Absolutely. There's not requirements. They're really just guidelines to help people out. I wanted to kind of step past the climate change design guidelines and just maybe talk a minute about what our office is trying to do on both sides of a really challenging problem and look to you guys and kind of acknowledge, like, I think one of the things that I hear a lot of late is, hey, we're really shifting our expenditures to adapting to climate change. And I wonder how, I guess this is a question for you and a question for all of us, how do we keep our eyes on both of these really interrelated goals and how do we succeed going into the future and achieving both of these really necessary kind of futures, right? If we just stop worrying about reducing our carbon emissions, we're not going to get there. One of the things back in the purple book that we talked about earlier, one of the principles we laid out is there's really no adaptation without mitigation. And I don't know, it's I'm out of water and I got dry mouth, but it's a challenging question. And I think it's one that we need to vocalize more as architects, as citizens, as government employees, or otherwise, and really figure out what the solution is. And I'm pretty close to the end, so I'd love to hear more from you guys. This is such a quiet, well-behaved group. I feel bad. I feel awkward. Yes.
Sorry, I don't want to be the one asking questions, but when you're talking about financing earlier, obviously you're taking it from taxation. Is there any equivalent legislation that you're looking at as a state that would look at like a Superfund Act where you're looking at a polluter pay model? Like I'm in New Jersey and we're trying to look at a climate Superfund Act that's gone through the first phase of the state that has to be brought for a vote, but it would claw back. I mean, obviously it's a different state, but it's 2 to 5 billion a year from the top 10 polluters of the state in order to fund directly climate resilience measures. So to fund the kind of projects that you're discussing. Is there anything like that that Hawaii is also pursuing?
Can you repeat the number that you cited for you said New Jersey, and I think you said
5 billion annually for a period of 19 years. They go back and they have assessed up till from 2019, how much they've lost due to climate costs. They assess that. And then they've basically put together a program where the top 10 polluters in the state then have to provide that cash back from profit to the state. So they would have to pay. So it was made polluters pay rather than the tax office. And that legislation was drafted. It's already gone through its first phase, but unfortunately we have the political situation is it has to be brought to the floor at Senate by a Republican who doesn't favour it. So it's stuck, but that's what we're lobbying for. But all the legislation is there, and I just wondered if that model works at all in Hawaii, whether you have
we have significantly junior versions to that. So what we have, I refer to the Climate Resiliency Fund, which is the $9 million a year. So it's not billions, it's billions, and it's only 9. So what I was trying to explain, and I think this sometimes gets lost, but I'm sure in this room it's not lost. That kind of money is really helpful and catalytic for planning, but it really doesn't do anything at all that's substantial for infrastructure. And the numbers we are talking about are billions of dollars. And so it's a challenging environment in that we know that, and we're trying to move towards that, but we haven't quite turned that corner. The state also has the green fee, and that also is junior to what you were talking about. I thought you said 65 billion a year.
2 to 5.
2 to 5. Either way, still a big number. Feel much better about it. 2 to 5 billion a year. That sounds like the right ballpark, but not where we are. So the green fee, I think, was it like 90 million a year? Is that what? Yeah.
But is that still from the population, or is that from corporate?
It's actually a tourism.
It's
tax.
Okay. So is there anything where you could apply something like that to large corporations instead?
There is nothing like that right now.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, the city and county is involved in a lawsuit that involves big oil, but that's not really the subject of today's conversation, and that would be speculative to try to determine what kind of outcomes might yield.
Okay.
Yeah. But good question. It is a lot of money, and one of the things we're doing now is actually trying to get a lot more reasonable estimates on those total costs. We haven't gone through that exercise where we know 2 to 5 billion, but we're in the midst of that now as well. Yeah.
They should have those sorts of companies. I mean, I know we've had tourism and military, it's our big tax rate.
Well, I think the reference that I understood from you is like a polluter pays kind of reference. So it's like a oil companies
Yeah, it's
basically.
like Exxon, Chevron, like the 10 biggest
Right.
would be the ones responsible.
Great.
Okay, so it's not necessarily based in the state.
George, you had a question?
Yeah, this is all good ideas, but I think we need some benchmarks for every one of them. Yeah, so like you said, just said, ETS expand mobility choice and, there's lots of ideas. And what's your plan? You get one a year, 2 a year, 3 a year?
So it's a great question, George. So we actually have a climate action plan update that's in the midst of being drafted right now and will be out soon. And a lot of that baseline information as well as the targets are in that. I think today's presentation was a little bit more abbreviated than was going to allow me to really get into that. The point of this slide is really to talk about that there's two sides of this, and then there's also things that are kind of in both. And that's something that I think we really, at least, we feel that we really need to start paying more attention to. It used to be in my, I guess, I used to do some architectural work when I was younger in design work, and those things that like had benefits in multiple spaces, but the primary benefit wasn't really strong from a financial standpoint, were the ones that were hardest to implement, right? But we're continuing to see more and more, even with the costs of things from a utility standpoint. I think, one of the interesting evolutions right now is that I mentioned stormwater as an important aspect of what the city is doing, and there is a plan to stand up a stormwater utility. They fully intend to give people discounts for more permeable properties, right? So all of a sudden, whether it's your green roof or your grass screen or whatever it might be, is going to now bring an actual savings in return once that utility is in place and people are being charged on the basis of impermeable surfaces. So those things get easier from the accounting standpoint, even though they're getting harder from a checkbook standpoint overall across the community. Sir.
So there's the urban tree inventory that you mentioned. I remember seeing online an urban forestry plan. Is there any update to that, or is that connected to the urban tree inventory?
Yeah, so we actually the first presenter,
Heather.
Yes, Heather McMillan and her group gave us we received a grant through the state and through Heather's outfit that is helping us to work on the tree standards. And the idea here is that, the biggest issue that we have with placing trees is like people in planning and the people in the resilience office, we all love trees. And then we go talk to the people in maintenance and the people in design and construction, and they all love trees too, but they're like not on the street. They get in the way of the lights, they get in the way of the infrastructure, all that kind of stuff. So we're hoping that going through the design standards is gonna try to alleviate some of those conflicts and make it more acceptable for us to get more trees and more projects. But it is something, we're also trying to change the mindset so people see trees as part of our capital investment as opposed to just a nice to have at the end of the project. Yes.
I was similarly gonna ask about on your guiding references slide where the forest action plan was on that one. It's I think a really interesting, good, another plan guiding document in that bucket. And I think it is due to be updated next year. It's so it's a little bit dated compared to these other ones right now. But yeah.
I have to admit this is embarrassing. I don't know. I'm just gonna admit it though. I don't know what document you're referring to.
The urban forestry management action plan.
Okay, from DPR.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, fair. Melissa was gonna stand up and help me out, get you guys more excited.
You put me out of a job, Ben. You guys do. No other questions.
Yeah. Well, join me. Let's do that.
So I'm also coming from the private sector community here. So I'm curious, what's standing out to you guys from the viewpoint of our industry and the things that you think are going to affect what we do every day in the built environment? I've got some ideas, but I want to hear if there's anything top of mind from you.
I think it's you.
Yeah.
I've been doing all the talking already. You guys are on the spot.
So I guess for the private sector and infrastructure projects, which is what we work on mostly, is maybe just implementing, even though it's not regulatory, these plans, but kind of thinking outside the box and implementing some of these concepts. Yeah. So that's how the private sector can contribute. Because it'll at some point may be regulatory, but at this point it's not. Like these are these plans. So.
And I know that, within our industry, we are having conversations, there's a lot of conversations about resilience best practices. And so I think a lot of us think about this too, like how do we integrate resilience into the work we do? And how do we collaborate with government agencies to kind of inform where the regulations could be going and make that a two-way conversation, right? So I guess maybe a question for Ben could be is, how can we contribute or be part of that process or have that two-way feedback loop as we go through processes like One Water that might tell us this is where we're heading, this is where Honolulu's heading in terms of designing our future infrastructure and land use.
Thanks, Melissa. I appreciate the question. I do think that the design flood elevations was one example where we need to start discussing these things more in public-private fora or in partnership with each other, because my experience with energy codes is one example, is that we have, the city's job is to put something on the table for kind of the first pass. Come in and say, that's a good idea, that's a terrible idea, here's why, and then we kind of rework things, right? And that process takes a lot, and the higher the stakes are, the more difficult that process is. And so let's get started. I think there's different avenues for us to be engaging on those different subjects. The One Water Plan and the One Water Panel is one, and that's really just kind of turning the corner to start being outward facing. There's a website reference on there for folks who want to look into with a little more specificity what's happening with One Water. Adapt Waikiki 2050 is another example that the Department of Planning and Permitting is doing a great job on that a lot of you are very familiar with. And that really talks about the more immediate needs in Waikiki, but it's the same kind of issues that we need people to show up and talk about, right? Because the danger for government is like, I think we all saw what happened in the challenges with the Army Corps of Engineers when we were looking at the Alawai flood mitigation project, and all these meetings and all this contention and all this money. And at the end of the day, we had court rulings that ended up putting the thing at like over $10 billion. Just wasn't going to happen. So the question becomes, how do we get that education? I think you guys have engaged UH in the RAP project as an example, the Waikiki Resilience and Adaptation Project, right? So seeing how helpful it is to have that discussion, have these conceptual ideas put forward in a broader community and say, here's some of the potential solutions. Like, let's all start owning that. I mean, it's not easy, but we can definitely do it. So there's opportunities there for sure. I don't know if that's an answer or not.
For sure. Well, I guess one question would be, I bet a lot of us would be interested to see what those design guidelines look like. So are those going to be available to?
That's the question of the day. That is the question of the day, and the answer ultimately is yes. We just have to make sure that we put them out there with the right messaging, because I think the question that was asked about their applicability is an important one, and it's really important for us to communicate with people that we have them, we're working on them, and ultimately these are not regulations. What we don't want is this kind of violent reaction to, oh my God, you're doing this right now. What we do want is for people to understand that, generally speaking, this is what we're doing in-house, because these are the impacts we imagine that we have to prepare for. And at some point way down the line, we're going to have those conversations in the broader environment as well.
It's that question. April, do you have a question?
I think I just wanted to add to the other part of that conversation is it's private sector. I think a lot of our scopes are now starting to incorporate resiliency and climate challenges, but we all also have projects that don't include that. But we as professionals in being in this conversation and learning and evolving with systems and ideas and designs and the like, and I can't wait to see the design guidelines, because we still have an opportunity from a professional standpoint to still keep that in mind and incorporate what we can, even if we don't call it that. And we all are getting direction, environmental and the like, NEPA, that we can't use certain terms anymore and yada, yada, right? It doesn't mean that we can't address the issue. It doesn't mean that we can't address coastal flooding. There's still coastal flooding. We just can't call it sea level rise. It's silly, but it's true. So I think us as professionals evolving with the conversation and still looking and incorporating those opportunities, even if it's not blatant.
So I think I'm hearing we're getting pulled in a lot of different directions. You know, we all as professionals, we want to incorporate resilience, and we're getting asked to in a lot of scenarios. And other people are more cost conscious, and they're like, we only want to do the bare minimum. And then we've got the federal government saying, you know, you can't even say certain things anymore. So we're getting pulled in a lot of different directions right now. And how do we? I think I'm pretty confident in saying that the best practice of our disciplines is toward incorporating more resilience. Would you guys all agree with that? So it's like, yeah, how do we operate within this context and work together with the city? Because obviously you're going in the same direction. So yeah, and maybe our work together can influence those other spheres where and we can raise the bar collectively for what's being designed here. That would be the hope. Yeah.
There's two chats.
There's some chats in there. Okay, I'll check them out.
As responding to the chat, I'm gonna say something that's difficult to say, but I think is also true. Like, one of the things that we look at when we look at the amount of process that the city has to take on to do these projects, and then the fact that all these projects now have an expiration date. Like, if you're talking about sea level rise and adaptation in particular, coastal adaptation, there's a limited time that you get for this investment. Yet it takes us a very long time to implement the investment. And so the question is, can we and are we willing to, and I'm talking about the bigger we again, are we willing to look at our regulatory regime and try to make it better and more streamlined, recognizing there's a lot of important things there that we have to be careful with, but ultimately we can't do 10, 15-year projects when something is only going to have a 30-year life. Right, we have to do these things faster, and I think Waikiki is going to be our first test, because I think, you know, when we look at the drainage system there, we know that we're having big issues that need to be addressed, and I think it's reasonable to say we can't afford 10 to 15 years when we're looking. You know, that Waikiki 2050 plan is a great example. It talks about a lot of things we need to do to get to 2050. That's only 25 years away. You know, so it's a significant challenge, and it's a scary one. But I think, like, let's talk about it. Let's figure out how to actually wade into that, and what it really. It's the same thing that's happening internally with One Water. Is we're all saying, oh wow, we don't know how to do this, but we got to figure it out because we're going to have to do all these things together. I'm just trying to be honest about exactly what those conversations are, and there's really smart people thinking about it and figuring out, like, we're going to have to share a modeling system, we're going to have to share capital, all this kind of stuff. It's tough.
Great to hear. It's really like a paradigm shift happening. So I do have a question from the chat, and then I'll go to the one in the room. Question from the chat is, how is the city and county working with the state on code and infrastructure resiliency?
So I think I'm going to speak to the code area that I know best, which is the energy code, and I will just say the decision at the executive level right now is, a lot of you know, is to stay the energy codes in the state building code council, and that's been the governor's direction for quite a while now. Todd and I were trying to remember how long it's been, but that's the point. It's been kind of a long time, one EO after another. And what that means is that the statutory requirement for those codes to just kick in after a certain amount of time has not happened. And we're still on the 2018 code. We thought we were gonna leapfrog to the 2024. Now the 2024 is also starting to get stale. So I don't know exactly what's gonna happen there, but I do know that there's a tremendous opportunity for us to be more efficient and to adopt those things. And there is right now an opportunity for you as professionals to kind of say, here's the best things in these future codes that we should adopt, and then maybe help us to understand what things we can leave behind. And maybe that's that simplification of regulation. Like, it's right in front of us. Like, the leadership doesn't want more regulation. You guys know what the absolute best things are. And if we can raise those up, you know, and just, I mean, throw them at us. Tell us, you know, if AIA came to us and said, here's our top 10 recommendations for improving the energy code, and it was super simple, it'd be something we could engage on. We could try to move forward in spite of the fact that we're not going to right now be doing a wholesale code adoption. Yeah.
As a county code.
Yeah, I mean, it's right now, it's not tenable for us to go through the whole process and adopt a whole new code, but we certainly could listen to a body with the credibility to say, here's the recommendations we make. You know, I don't know what it is. Maybe is it heat pumps? Is it, you know, what's on that top 10 list of things we absolutely shouldn't be missing any longer while we wait for leadership to decide, you know, when to get back into the cycle if we do it all.
Yeah, I was wondering, I mean, you mentioned the national insurance, flood, whatever, for elevations, and it seems like resiliency is a nat with, I don't know enough about how insurance rates work, but of course, they're all going up, and there's a story about why their insurance rate went up 4,500%. Not sure if that's connected to the resiliency issues or not. But that is the number one reason is these extreme climate events, right? That insurance companies are getting in California, getting in Florida. So it seems like a natural fit that maybe it's not regulation through the regulatory arm, but through the insurance premium reduction arm that feeds, that engages the sector. How do those conversations happen?
So this is truly a conversation now because we're getting into an area where I think some of you in the room have as much background as I do, but I will share that I have been involved with a little bit of this conversation when the condo insurance crisis hit last year, and had the privilege of sitting down with Sue Savio and others out in Hawaii Kai, and we talked about, people were in the room and they were outraged about how much their insurance was going up, and it was really the Lahaina fire putting Hawaii back on the insurance map for these national, international companies and saying there's risk here, and the premiums going up. I don't know that like my perception is they don't have such a fine pen yet where they're pointing to individual resilience measures, more so that they're saying like in a broad brush kind of way, you have new pipes, you're okay, you have a sprinkler system, you're okay. It's not that granular at this point, but I can imagine that there will be standards that emerge that they start to see trends in and benefits from that will become more prevalent. And I think the NFIP is an example. Certainly, Firewise communities is something I think people are paying attention to as another example. So the things we do matter, and I think as the rules we put in place matter in terms of our resilience overall. So yeah, I assume that you're saying, hey, maybe that's another driver for all these things.
Yeah.
Which makes sense.
And it seems like it would be pretty straight. It doesn't have to be right, but do you provide an office building ability to open up windows in the case of a power outage?
Right.
And there's some ventilation since your insurance rate goes down.
And I imagine that the insurance industry will look to standards as well as others, and the question is, what standard will they pick up the ICC kind of stuff and say we're going to go forward with that, or are they going to come up with their own standard and apply that over and say this is more focused on resiliency? And I don't know the answer to that. You?
Well, I know the insurance industry has a lot of excellent data on risk and resiliency, and not a lot of which is being shared outside. So I know that there are channels for sharing it, and that's kind of my interest in this whole thing is how do you reduce the risk? How do you stop the major transfer of risk that's happening right now from private insurance to the public and the taxpayers, including the government? And so I feel like the government has some leverage to explore more information sharing about risk and resilience with the insurance industry. And I do think insurance could be a major driver and a disruptor it could also help us further and faster towards some of our resilience goals by kind of sending real signals of, we shouldn't be building here or intensifying here over time. I don't know. This is just my little editorial digression, but right. So it's a very interesting way it's developing, but I feel like there needs to be more dialogue between, and I feel like government agencies have the ability to have that conversation with insurers more than the rest of us do. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, on a small scale, that NFIP in the community rating system, we do repetitive loss analysis. So we do look at like where there are more claims, and that is a factor in the whole system in terms of measuring that and being aware of what those high risk areas are. So that speaks to that point. That's just kind of one little piece of one little program. So I don't have more answers on the kind of bigger picture of what's happening in insurance.
I think I'd add one more piece to it because it's a reality check, and having been on the county side and now in the private sector, there's also a challenge with cost. of these kinds of things. So with national flood insurance, yes, we can change the codes and the requirements to require other things, which lowers the cost of insurance for that community, but it also raises the cost of construction because that's now a requirement. And so I think that's part of our challenge, and so cool that we're here with both planners and architects in the conversation, because that every time we increase certain things in our codes and our building codes or in our zoning codes, it may be safer and all of that, but it also can increase, not all the time, but can increase costs. And so I think all of us thinking about that balance and sort of figuring out the that sweet spot of meeting the goals of the state and the counties from a resiliency standpoint without exponentially increasing costs. And we're always talking about affordable housing. It's a never ending conversation and harder to achieve in many ways. So
Yeah, no,
I don't
that's
know,
the
I just-
idea, is doing that, and it would pay for itself with reduced insurance costs by building it. Results.
it would have to be an extreme decrease in insurance in order to really pay for itself. But I hear you and I'm for it.
I hope you're going up a few and down your thing doesn't get destroyed.
Yeah. If it's that simple.
There's another question in the back I wanted to.
Well, I'm gonna pile on to what you just said, April, because so Ben started off by making a little joke about engineers, which is really appropriate in our planning. All the time, right? So apologies to the few engineers who are in the room, but no, I think we all work with engineers either in our offices or as strong partners in all of our work. But they're actually the ones that we need right here in this conversation. To your point, Ben, about figuring out what are the appropriate guidelines and what are the key recommendations that we need. It's them, the guys who are doing sort of the unsexy stuff. They're actually doing the really most sexy, the guideline building stuff. And I do know for a fact that, for example, one of our colleagues in my office was actively involved in one of these guideline developing conversations. And I don't know exactly where it went, but I do remember hearing some commentary about how that process was getting stalled. So I don't recall the details right now, but those are the guys who actually know and could tell us, what the heat pump, how it needs to be designed, or what parts of the 2024 international building codes need to be adopted now rather than waiting 20 years, because we're always so many years behind on our computational building codes. So they are part of the conversation. They are in a different conversation. Well, I don't want to say different. I'm sure there's coalescing happening somewhere, right? But when we planners have these conversations, they actually would really be a great partner to have in these conversations.
That's a great point. And the first thing I think of when I think of engineers is data. And one of the things I will say as well is that I think our regulatory regime in the past has had we've had the slack in the system that we've been able to use these broad brush kind of regulations where everybody has to do X or everybody has to do Y. But perhaps one of the solutions is actually higher resolution data. And the example I'll give you is we've recently been talking about extreme heat, and extreme heat in Hawaii is not a conversation everybody gets yet, but it's real and it will be increasing. And we have an urban heat island effect that has a impact of about a 10-degree variable in terms of one place to another based on all the asphalt and hard surfaces. And we can do a lot about that. But if we just tell everybody they have to treat all their surfaces versus saying, wait, we can model the environment and actually figure out which surfaces are getting the most exposure and then say those are the surfaces we actually have to treat, right? And have it on a sliding scale. Like now all of a sudden we're connected to reality, as opposed to the accusation that you get when you do that as a general policy is, you're making me do this and my building is behind this other building and it's totally shaded and you're dumb. And that happens all the time. Like that absolutely happens because we try to simplify for expediency and understanding versus saying this is a complex system, we understand the data, here's what we're gonna do. But I don't know, I haven't seen that happen yet, but I feel like there's an opportunity for it.
I think we have time for one more question.
One more question. So anybody that hasn't asked a question yet?
Guys.
I'm looking for my energy modeler. Where are you? I told you I was gonna put you on the spot. You have a question? No. You can give us our top 3 energy measures for the energy bill, but go ahead, please, in the back with your question.
Oh, sorry. Well, I do think engineering work is sexy, just for one, but like I think one thing that I don't know how much of you talked about your community hubs, and I don't know how active a collaboration you have on these kind of private interactions. So you were talking about collaboration from the private sector with the city, but we have these environmental commissions that have actually been very effective in feeding in. So it's community members, but who have experience in environment law, whatever, and they review all of the projects in a local community and will give their feedback. So they don't have any sort of formal authority, but it does help to build those conversations that you're having. And second off, you were talking about education with your group that comes in the summer, and though it sort of sounds a little bit like loose just to talk about education as a solution, we have found it highly effective to engage with junior and senior high school students, and they've implemented statewide policies. So it's not like just a cursory, let's include young people. They end up being extremely active, and in terms of communicating between your community, people who are experts, they become very effective in that sphere because they're talking to all the people around them, different social circles. So I've found, positive examples in sort of more broad approach to working with high schools. And it's hard when you're doing it piecemeal from a community level. But if there was something at a sort of city or state level where you could really engage with your boards of education to integrate it, the work you're doing, I think that would be beyond just the summer program. It would be really effective, and I've seen that come to fruition. So, and then those people are the ones who are going into your university program that you described. So to me, that's like an important piece of your conversation.
Shall we leave it there? I don't know if there's a question, but I do appreciate the comments and the idea of focus. And overall, like, really thankful that you guys all wanted to engage on this and that you invited me. So, Melissa, anything to close out with?
Awesome. That was the easiest moderating job ever. Thanks.
Very good.